Hello everyone and welcome back to another Brad Teaches video. Today we're looking at the third of our Snap walkthrough series. This time we're looking at our selection of blocks within Snap to manipulate sound. If you don't have your headphones on, I would find a pair and put them on because I think that makes it so much clearer on some of the blocks that we're working with today. As you can see on my screen, I've already imported a couple of sounds, but if you want to follow along, I would go to the File menu right here, go to Sounds on the very bottom, and pick out and import one of these sounds that you want to use. As you can see here, I already have 3 imported from that menu, as well as a selection of my own, which is a copy of the Windows XP startup screen noise. So if I go to scripts, I'm going to go ahead and start on my first block, which is rather basic. It is play sound. So if I select maybe the Windows XP startup and I click, you should be able to hear that amazing Windows XP startup music that you might be too young to really have heard before on your own. This block and the difference between this next one, which plays that sound until done, is that when we play the Windows XP startup sound, if we have another block beneath it, let's say we have a cat's meow and I click, we can see that those both will go off at the same time. However, what if I want the meow to start and then I also want the Windows XP startup to go after? In that case, I would actually use the play sound until done for the meow and then for the Windows XP startup. Of course, if I want to stop all the sounds, even when the blocks are executing, I have a block for that. So you can see here, I have them start and I have them abruptly end. That might come in handy if you're working on, say, a video game and you might have a character run off the screen and you might not want the sound to go with them, right? You could have that sound potentially end prematurely by including this block somewhere in your loop. Some of the fun you might have in Snap when working with sound is the ability to manipulate the different noises. Here, I'm going to pull out the play sound and I select, let's say, the Windows XP startup, which is just an easy sound to kind of demonstrate this with. And I have the Hertz players right here. If I clear out some of my old blocks, this Hertz affects the frequency at which you hear the sound. It's a little bit hard to understand maybe if you don't understand the way sound works, which I don't think I am an expert by any means, but let's go ahead and look at some of the different ways that we can affect that. Here, if I play the Windows XP startup sound at 22,000 Hertz and I click, it's going to play a very deep sound. It sounds almost like a dramatic version of our Windows XP startup. What if I wanted to hear that at a much higher frequency? What I believe happens is that we're going to hear a much faster sound and it's going to sound almost like squealy pitch. It's going to sound like if it were a version of, say, something on Alvin and the Chipmunks. You can see it plays much faster than the original and it also has a much sharper tone and it has much higher notes. And that's kind of what our Hertz right there does. We can set that value, but the sort of typical that it normally comes at is that 48,000 Hertz, which plays something like that. Now let's say we want to know something about our sounds. We have the ability to look at this reporter block right here, which starts with duration of sound. Let's pick the meow and I want to see the duration. I can report that out to be 0.8 seconds. If I want to know the name of it, that could be great. I could also know the number of channels, the sample rate, and the samples. Those are a little bit complicated, but let's go ahead and look at the sample rate. If I click, you can see I get that 48,000 Hertz, so I know what the original sound of any of mine are at. So maybe I could put this block into there, so I could play it at the original should I ever need to. We also have some other very useful things in here, including number of channels, and you map that to any one of your sounds. Beyond that, we also have another block, which is much similar to a block we saw in the looks video, which sort of allows us to manipulate sound. Now, I'm not going to show us how to use this on this video because it is a little bit more advanced, but you would use this in the same fashion where you might be able to manipulate the samples of your song and come out with something on the other end that is maybe a little bit more fine-tuned and manipulated than just changing the Hertz, which changes like just basic pitch. Continuing on past our new sound list rate, which gives us our Hertz, we also have the ability to start creating sort of some custom sounds or some beats within Snap. Here, our very first block will simply let us rest for a certain number of beats, which in this case will just be, it's basically like using a wait time for seconds, right? We are also able to play particular notes at particular number of beats. So here you can see I've got this piano selection. We're going to go ahead and stay with playing note 60 for 5 beats. If I snap those two together, normally it just makes a really quick sound. But instead, what if I want to put that in a repeat block, which is a block, of course, we'll show in some of our loop videos later. We get it right here from control, and we have repeat. So if I put that within my repeat block, I can then play that note a number of times. You might have not heard it over me speaking, but let me go ahead and play it for you again. Plays a very quick sample. If I want to step that up, I might be able to say play for 1 beat and then rest for 0.2. And it's a little bit more audible that time. Let's say I want to play a slightly different instrument. Right now, I believe it's doing something like kind of the piano play, right? But what if I want to do a square instead? If I now play note 60 after having clicked set instrument to 2, you could say it plays the same thing. I think I was on the square. Let's go ahead and play differently. You can see it sounds a little bit different there. Let's go ahead and switch it to sine. And you get that much more mellow tone. So the set instrument allows us to select from a variety of different sounds. Well, let's go ahead and put that back to square. To show more and more of our sound blocks, it does become necessary to start building slightly bigger blocks, of which I can show you how some of this operates here. We left off by setting our instrument to 3 and by just playing notes, but I want to start with using my set tempo. So set tempo is going to dictate how many beats per minute I actually have, which means that right now, if I'm resting at 1 beat, that means that I would have 190 beats per minute, and I'm taking 190th of that to rest. So if I'm doing this and I set my instrument to 3, you can hear I get a sound, and I'm going to decrease this to 0.7, something a little bit like this. It's a pretty basic sound. It repeats a few times. But what if I want to start doing something a little bit more interesting? Well, what if I could increase my tempo every time that played? So now I'm going to get a sound that sort of increases as it goes along. And let's go ahead and set this to repeat 10 times. So you can hear every single time that plays, it gets just a little bit faster and starts to get what sounds almost like a little bit higher pitch. That can create for some pretty fun effects here. If I go to maybe repeat 50, and let's say I decrease my beats to rest at 0.3 to start with, you'll see I get something that comes closer and closer to being a single sound. And we'll go ahead and stop it there. So I start to get the ability to manipulate this. I can change the tempo in a negative way. If I wanted to, I could also set another repeat block that might repeat it in the opposite way, where those sounds get further and further apart, and my tempo might get back closer to 190. You're also able to change your volume and set your volume within Snap. Because 100 is what we're set at right now, we can't go any higher than 100, so we can't really make this any louder, and we don't want to go much quieter, but you do have that ability. So maybe you want to set it to go higher. You'd also make it quieter and quieter every time you did so, which of course could be kind of cool. If you wanted to show something going further away on the screen or going farther from the user, you could also simulate that with sound as well as with distance or with looks by maybe decreasing something. We also have the ability to change the balance, which I think is pretty cool. If you're not wearing headphones, this might not make as much sense. If you're listening to this on a computer with maybe multiple speakers, you might be able to hear what's about to go on. Here, I'm going to start by setting my balance to 0, and I'm going to change my balance by 10. What the balance is going to do is it's going to switch audio channels. In our cases, what we care about is it's going to change it so that it's coming from either the left or the right side or the center to the opposite side. Here, as I go ahead and play, if you have your headphones in, it sounds like this is going further and further to the right. Let me go ahead and let you listen to that one more time for those who couldn't hear it, just in case if I was talking. If you're creating some really cool sprite scripts, you could have a method in which you change that balance when a user is going left to right across the screen, or maybe an object is, or even if you want to simulate that an object might be around, behind, or to the left of right of them. Finally, the last thing we have is the ability to play these different frequencies as well as stop the frequency. I'll go ahead and line this up. It shouldn't be too loud, but these frequencies can be a little bit annoying. Here, if I click, you can see it's going to start up that sound. Let's go ahead and set the balance back to 0. So you hear this in both headphones. And if I click that again, it doesn't stop. If I go to something like, let's say 100, a low frequency is going to sound more like the bass you're used to in a song. Whereas I set this to a high enough frequency, like let's say something like 600, it's going to play a little bit of a higher note. For those of you who have ever been to the audiologist, or if you've ever been to one of those things where they make you test your hearing, you're probably very used to that noise, which in this case concludes our look into the sound blocks within Snap. This is something that I have a lot of fun with and I think is really cool to add to your sprites. And I think it shows off a really finished project. And I hope to see you in the next video where we look at the pen.